Why you wouldn't last 24 hours in medieval times. The pottage that haunts your spoon. Welcome to 1295. Edith, a weary peasant scraping by in a muddy English village where your kitchen's a smoky fire pit, your pantry's a corner of dirt, and your daily menu's a grim choice between hunger and something that might just kill you. You thought your 2025 microwave dinners with their soggy veggies mystery meat and that one weird aftertaste were a culinary low point. Think again, because you're hunched over a hearth that's coughing more smoke than a 2025 vape convention, stirring pottage, a watery weevil. Infested sludge of turnips, cabbage, and despair cooked for days in a pot that's seen better centuries, per medieval dietary records. This isn't soup. It's a survival tactic, the medieval equivalent of your mom's mystery stew. Except instead of hiding broccoli, it's hiding bugs and dirt clods. Your kids are begging for bread, dense black and spiked with ergot, a rye fungus that could spark hallucinations, burning sensations, or death, possibly fueling witch hunt frenzies per historians. Water's a plague-ridden death trap, so you're chugging 8 pints of small ale a day, kids included because brewing kills germs per 13th century studies. You're standing in your one-room hut, your wool tunic itching like a cheap Halloween costume, and your boots caked in mud, stickier than your 2025 coworkers' gossip, dodging Wat the Gong. Farmer's stench as he passes by, and you're tempted to chuck the pot out the window. But hunger's a harsher master than any lord. This isn't just cooking. It's a medieval gauntlet, and you're dodging starvation with a splintery spoon. You're in your hut, a drafty box of wattle and daub that makes your 2025 studio apartment look like a penthouse with a fire pit spitting sparks and a single shelf holding a sad onion, a lump of rye flour, and a jug of ale that's safer than the village well's sewage stew. You thought your 2025 grocery delivery, with its pre-chopped kale and organic quinoa, was a meal prep lifesaver. In 1295, your grocery store is a patchy garden you've been weeding by hand, and your menu is pottage, a gloopy mess you've been nursing for 4 days, adding scraps as you eat. Because waste is a sin, and starvation's a neighbor. You're tossing in a wilted turnip, your hands raw from digging, hoping it masks the weevils you saw crawling in the pot yesterday, because medieval records say pottage was a peasant's mainstay, often more grit than nourishment. You're tempted to call it dinner, but it's a far cry from the grand feasts of movie nights with their turkey legs and golden goblets. Those are for lords, not you. And the closest you get to meat is a scrap of pork, so close to rotten, you hold your nose per accounts of scarce protein. You're stirring, coughing through smoke thicker than a 2025 rush hour fog, and you're praying the pottage doesn't turn your gut or your mind, because ergot's a sneaky killer, and you're not ready to see demons or join a witch hunt. Bread's your other staple, but it's no 2025 artisan sourdough with its fluffy crumb and Instagram glow. This is a dark, dense slab of rye and barley ground between stones that chip into the flour, giving every bite a gritty crunch that could crack a 2025 dentist's drill per milling records. You're kneading dough, your arms aching like you've been hauling 2025 Black Friday deals, knowing the flour might hide ergot fungus that sent whole villages tripping or dying per historical links to mass hysteria. You're tempted to skip the bread, but it's 60% of your diet per peasant accounts, and without it, you're facing a hunger that gnaws harder than Watt's stories about his gong farming gigs. You're shaping a loaf, dodging Watt's offer to taste your dough. He's got a nose for free food and a stench that clears the hut, and you're tempted to barter for a scrap of salt fish. but the village's fish is weeks old, reeking like a 2025 dumpster per coastal trade notes. You're tempted to dream of the Lord's spiced venison, but you shake it off because your pottage and bread are what you've got, and they're worth more than a noble's feast if they keep you alive. Water's the real kicker. You can't drink it because the village wells a cocktail of human waste and dead rats. A plague risk that makes 2025 tap water look like a spa treatment. You're pouring small ale, a weak 1 to 3% brew. That's your hydration breakfast, insanity, with kids as young as 5, sipping it per dietary studies. Because boiling kills germs, where wells breed death. You thought your 2025 coffee addiction, with its $5 lattes and jittery buzz, was a crutch. Try downing 8 pints of ale daily, a necessity that's got your kids burping like 2025 frat boys, and you're dodging Watt's joke about watering it down with well water, because even he knows that's a death sentence. You're tempted to ration the ale, but it's your lifeline, and the village is buzzing with tales of folks who drank water and didn't see the next harvest per health records. You're tempted to pray for a clean spring, but you settle for a swig, because faith and ale are your true anchors in this medieval mess. The village is a chorus of hunger, with every hut stirring its own grim pottage and kneading ergot-laced bread, because famine's always one bad crop away. Per 1295 manor accounts, you overhear the blacksmith's wife griping about a spoiled fish that walked itself out of the pot, and you're tempted to laugh, but you're too busy guarding your ale jug from Watt, who's sniffing around like a 2025 pickpocket. You thought your 2025 potlucks, with their store-bought dips and polite portions, were communal. Try a village where every neighbor swaps scraps, onions, barley a moldy crust, because sharing survival, and a full pot's a status symbol per communal records. You're tempted to boast about your 4-day pottage streak, but you keep it low-key because flaunting your pantry in 1295 is a great way to attract moochers or thieves. You're ladling out bowls, your kids grimacing at the weevil crunch, and you're proud because this pottage is your family's shield, even if it haunts your spoon and your nightmares. You're not reckless, though you know. Food's a gamble. One bad batch of ergot and you're hallucinating witches. One spoiled scrap and you're down like the village that lost half its folk to bad rye per records. You're also aware of the stakes. If you don't eat, you're too weak to plow, and your family's facing winter with empty bellies. The tavern warns of pottage that turned guts and bread that broke teeth. And you're double-checking every turnip like a 2025 health inspector, because you're not letting this pot betray you. You're tempted to skip a meal, but you settle for a gritty bite, because hunger's a thief, and you've got fields to work. You're not blind to the risks, moldy flour, rancid fish, and Watt's helpful offers to season your stew. But you're ready, because this hut's your kitchen, and you're forging life from scraps and ale. Tomorrow you'll face fields and filth, but today you're the queen of pottage, stirring, sipping, and keeping your village's hopes alive through winter's worst. The chamber pot that rules your night. You're still slogging through the muddy, smoky chaos of 1295 England. Edith, a weary peasant who's just survived another grim meal of pottage, a weevil-infested sludge of turnips, and despair choked down with gritty ergot-laced bread that could spark hallucinations, or worse, and washed it all with 8 pints of small ale, because the village well's a plague trap. You've stirred your pot over a smoky hearth, dodged Watt the gong farmer's stench, and kept your kids fed, clinging to the faint hope of a Lord's scraps or a miracle to ease your hunger. You thought your shared apartment bathroom nowadays, with its clogged drain and roommates' forgotten towels, was a hygiene horror. Think again, because night's fallen and you're facing the medieval bathroom. A chamber pot under your bed that's less toilet and more nightmare bucket, where flushing means shouting Gardy Lou and tossing waste into the street per urban customs. You're tiptoeing across your hut's dirt floor, your wool tunic itching like a flea circus, praying you don't trip over the pot or meet Watt, whose gong farming job, hauling human waste, earns 4 times your pay, but smells like a landfill's revenge per village records. The village reeks of rot and despair, the steward sniffing around for taxes, and you're tempted to sleep through the urge, but nature's calling. This isn't just hygiene, it's a stench-soaked quest, and you're surviving with a grimace and a quick prayer. You're in your one-room hut, a drafty wattle and daub shack, where the fire pit's embers glow like a dying hope, and the air's thick with smoke sweat and the faint whiff of yesterday's pottage. Nowadays, you'd have a porcelain throne with a flush valve and scented candles to make bathroom breaks bearable. But in 1295, your throne is a chipped clay pot tucked under a straw pallet shared by you, your kids, and whatever vermin sneak in per peasant accounts. You're squatting over it, your knees creaking like the village mill, hoping to finish before your youngest wakes and knocks it over, because cleaning a spilled chamber pot is a medieval nightmare no one preps you for. You're tempted to hold it till dawn, but the pot's already half full, and waiting means a stench that'll choke the hut worse than the village's open sewer by the river, a monster of stink that makes noses weep per London's Thames descriptions. You're dodging the urge to gag your tunic reeking of smoke and toil, and you're praying the pot doesn't overflow before you can haul it to the street where you'll yell Gardy Lou from the French Gardez Low, meaning watch the water, though it's anything but hoping no one's passing below per town, rules that limit dumping after 10 p.m. The village's sanitation is a grim joke. There's no sewer system, no garbage trucks, just pits and rivers where waste festers, making the air a toxic brew of human filth. Tanning chemicals and rotting scraps per hygiene records. Nowadays, you'd have sanitation crews and air fresheners to tame the smell. But in 1295, you're dodging Watt the Gong farmer, who prowls at night carting cesspit muck beyond the village walls for a wage 4 times yours per labor accounts. Though he's banned from taverns for his stench, a smell so vile it could scatter a church choir. You're tempted to envy his pay, but one whiff of his cart piled high with what you'd rather not name reminds you why you stick to plowing. You're hauling the pot to the window, your arms trembling, and you're tempted to dump it now. But a neighbor's shout of Gardy Lou and a splash below warn you to wait. Because getting hit by someone else's waste is a 1295 rite of passage you'd rather skip. You're praying for a breeze, but the village's odor clings like a curse, and you're starting to think the Lord's garderobes, stone seats dropping waste 70 feet to the moat. Per Dover Castle, fines are a luxury worth dying for. The village is buzzing with sanitation gripes because every hut wrestles its own chamber pot, and the river's so foul it could knock out a horse per chroniclers who called it a beast of reek. You overhear the blacksmith's wife cursing a misaimed dump that splattered her washing, and you're tempted to laugh, but you're too busy guarding your pot from Watt, who's sniffing around for a chance to inspect it, likely to skim his cut before carting it off. Nowadays, you'd have plumbing and privacy, but in 1295, your bathroom's a public affair, with neighbors' shouts of Gardy Lou echoing like a grim chorus, and you're dodging their waste as you walk to the fields per urban accounts. You're tempted to barter for a scrap of wool rich folks' toilet paper per records, but your leaves and left hand are free, if less than ideal. and you're not wasting grain on luxuries. You're tempted to boast about keeping your pot unspilled, but you keep it low-key because flaunting your hygiene in $12.95 is a great way to jinx it or attract Watt's nosy help. You're pouring carefully, your nose wrinkled, and you're proud because this pot's your nightly battle, even if it rules your dreams with its stench. You're not reckless, though, sanitation's a gamble. One spilled pot, and your hut's a cesspit. One bad aim, and you're the village pariah, like that woman shunned for hitting the priest per gossip. You're also aware of the stakes if you don't manage this disease creeps in, and 30% of kids don't see 5 per mortality stats, often from filth-borne plagues. The tavern warns of pots dumped too close to wells, poisoning drinkers, and you're double-checking your aim like a medieval sharpshooter because you're not letting this bucket betray you. You're tempted to skip the street and dig a pit, but village rules forbid it, and you're not risking a fine or a flogging per local laws. You're not blind to the risks, stray splashes, Watt's greedy eyes, and a steward who'd tax your waste if he could. But you're ready, because this hut's your battlefield, and you're forging survival from filth and caution. You're not alone, though. The village is a network of pot emptiers, each family dodging the same stench, sharing warnings, like watch the west window to avoid a dousing per communal habits, like the 1289 hamlet that banded together to dig a shared cesspit per records. You trade a nod with a neighbor for her tip about timing dumps after midnight because 1295's about teamwork, and a shared dodge is a cleaner village. You're tempted to dream of the Lord's garderobes, maybe with stone seats and no street tossing, but you shake it off because your chamber pot's your reality, and it's worth more than a noble's privy if it keeps you alive. You're tempted to curse the filth medieval records say 40% of diseases spread from bad sanitation, but you keep it cool because wasting energy's a sin, and you're not tempting fate. You're dumping nose-pinched heart steady, and you're savoring every stench-soaked survival 1 second, because this isn't just hygiene. It's a medieval epic, and you're the peasant, scarred but stubborn, ruling the night with a pot that haunts your soul. The fields that break your bones. You're still slogging through the muddy, smoky chaos of 1295 England. Edith, a weary peasant who's endured pottage laced with weevils and ergot bread that could send you tripping into a witch hunt frenzy, all washed down with 8 pints of small ale, because the village well's a plague trap. You've mastered the art of dodging Watt's gong farming stench and tossing your chamber pot's contents with a shouted Gardy Lou, keeping your hut just shy of a cesspit while outsmarting the village's reeking streets. You thought your desk job nowadays, with its air-conditioned office and ergonomic chair, was a grind that left you drained. Think again, because dawn's breaking, and you're yoking oxen to a wooden plow, ready to tear through fields from sunrise to sunset, burning 4,000 calories daily per medieval harvest records, with tools so crude they'd make a modern farmer weep. You're trudging through mud, your wool tunic itching like a swarm of fleas, your hands blistered from a sickle that's more rust than blade, working for a lord who'll snatch half your crop. The village buzzes with tales of broken backs and meager wages, Watts lurking with stories of pure finders scraping dog dung for pennies, and you're tempted to collapse in the furrows, but 2 pennies a day barely enough for 2 loaves. Per labor accounts keep you swinging. This isn't just work, it's bone-breaking survival, and you're a medieval mule toiling for scraps in a world that grinds you down. You're in the fields, a patchwork of dirt and despair that makes a modern community garden look like a royal estate, with oxen plodding slower than a village gossip's tongue and a plow that's more splinter than tool digging furrows for barley you'll never fully own. Nowadays, you'd have tractors and automated seeders to make farming a breeze. But in 1295, your machinery is a pair of oxen that'd rather nap than pull. And your tech is a sickle so dull it could barely cut a roomer per agricultural records. You're heaving the plow, your back screaming like you've been hauling a week's groceries up 10 flights, burning calories faster than a marathon runner, because harvest season means 16-hour days under a sun that bakes you like the Lord's bread. Per manor logs, you're tempted to rest, but the steward's circling his velvet cloak, absurdly clean, ready to dock your grain. If you slack, and you're dodging Watt's tales of tanners, wading in urine, or blacksmiths choking on forge fumes, jobs that yellow the skin or blind the eyes per trade accounts. You're praying for a breeze, but the fields are a furnace, and you're starting to think the Lord's cushy hall is a myth worth dying for. Your kids aren't spared. Your 7-year-old's already eyeing an apprenticeship, bound to a blacksmith or weaver for 14 years of 6-day weeks per guild rules, because in 1295, childhood's a luxury and labor's a birthright. Nowadays, kids have summer camps and iPads, but here they're hauling water or gleaning stray grains, their hands as calloused as yours by 10. You're tempted to dream of a trade, maybe weaving, though looms, break fingers, or baking. Though ergot's a baker's curse, but 90% of the village are peasants like you per population. Stats chained to the Lord's land with no escape. You're dodging Watt's pitch to join the pure finders scavenging dog dung for tanners' vats. A job for the desperate that pays a penny, a pile per urban records, and you're tempted to laugh, but your own wage, 2 pennies for a day's plow, enough for 2 loaves, makes his offer less absurd. You're tempted to curse the Lord's tithe, which claims half your barley, but rebellion's a flogging offense, and you're not risking your kid's next meal for a moment's defiance. The village is buzzing with labor talk because every soul's breaking their back for scraps from farmers to link boys lighting nobles' paths with torches for a crust per trade logs. You overhear the blacksmith's wife griping about her husband's burns and a tanner's apprentice whining about urine-soaked hands, and you're tempted to nod, but you're too busy yanking the plow, your shoulders knotted like the village gossip's lies. Nowadays, you'd have labor laws and coffee breaks, but in 1295, your union is a shared grunt with the drover, and your break is a swig of ale between furrows. Because stopping means no pay, and no pay means no bread. You're tempted to boast about plowing 3 rows, today a record for your aching frame, but you keep it low-key, because bragging in 1295 is a great way to jinx it or draw the steward's eye. You're slicing through dirt. Your breath ragged, and you're proud, because these fields are your family's lifeline, even if they're breaking your bones and your spirit. You're not reckless, though you know labor's a gamble. 1 snapped plow, and you're idle, earning nothing. 1 bad harvest, and the Lord's tithe leaves you starving like the 1295 famine that culled 1/3 of a nearby village per records. You're also aware of the stakes if you don't work. Your kids go hungry, and winter's a wolf at your door. The tavern warns of plowmen lamed by overwork, or tanners poisoned by their vats, and you're double-checking your sickle's edge like a medieval surgeon, because you're not letting a dull blade betray you. You're tempted to slack, but you settle for steady swings, because haste is a field's worst enemy, and you've got mouths to feed. You're not blind to the risks, snap tools, angry stewards, and Watt's job offers that smell worse than his cart. But you're ready because these fields are your crucible, and you're forging survival from sweat and soil. You're not alone, though. The village is a network of toilers, drovers, reapers, even Watt, all sweating for the Lord's grain, like the 1289 hamlet that shared sickles to outlast a flood per records. You trade a nod with a reaper for his trick about sharpening blades with a whetstone, because 1295's about teamwork, and a shared hack is a stronger harvest. You're tempted to dream of the Lord's idle scribes maybe scribbling in warm halls with no mud, but you shake it off because your plow's your reality, and it's worth more than a noble's quill if it feeds your kids. You're tempted to curse the grind medieval records, say 40% of peasants died from overwork or hunger, but you keep it cool because wasting energy's a sin, and you're not tempting fate. You're plowing sickle, slashing heart-pounding, and you're savoring every bone-breaking, soil-turning second. Because this isn't just labor, it's a medieval epic, and you're the peasant scarred, but stubborn forging life from fields that grind you to dust. The leeches that steal your blood. You're still slogging through the muddy, smoky chaos of 1295 England. Edith, a weary peasant who's endured pottage crawling with weevils, chugged small ale to dodge plague-ridden well water, emptied chamber pots with a shouted Gardy Lou to avoid turning your hut into a cesspit, and plowed fields from dawn to dusk, burning 4,000 calories for a lord who claims half your barley. You've outsmarted Watt's stench, kept your kids fed, and hauled your aching body through furrows, clinging to the faint hope of surviving another harvest. You thought a trip to the doctor nowadays, with its long waits and overpriced prescriptions, was a healthcare hassle. Think again, because a fever's gripped you, and you're facing medieval medicine. A nightmare of bloodletting leeches and mercury potions that's more torture than cure, with a 30% chance your kids won't see 5 per mortality records. You're lying on a straw mat in your smoky hut, your wool tunic itching like a swarm of fleas as a healer sharpens a blade to drain your bad blood. The village buzzes with tales of failed remedies and plague graves. Watt's peddling a mercury cure that's deadlier than the disease, and you're tempted to crawl to the fields, but your body's betraying you. This isn't just healing. It's a medieval gamble, and you're dodging death with a wince and a prayer. You're in your one-room hut, a drafty wattle and daub shack where the fire pit's embers sputter and the air's thick with smoke and the sour tang of unwashed bodies. Your kids huddled nearby, their eyes wide with fear. Nowadays, you'd pop an ibuprofen, sip some tea, and binge a streaming series to ride out a fever. But in 1295, your clinic is this mat, and your doctor is a bearded quack who blames your sickness on bad air, or an imbalance of the 4 humors, blood phlegm, yellow bile, black bile, per medical texts. He's prepping to slice your arm for bloodletting, draining a bowl's worth to balance you a treatment so common, it's practically a village handshake per records. You're tempted to bolt, but you're too weak, and the healer's muttering about using 70 leeches at once, a method endorsed by texts that claims sucking out bad blood cures everything from fevers to broken hearts. You're dodging his knife, your head pounding like the village mill, and you're praying he doesn't reach for the mercury, a poison prescribed for coughs to syphilis, per apothecary logs, that kills faster than the plague that culled 50% of Europe in the 14th century. Your teeth ache too, a throbbing reminder that dental care's a scream fest, with no brushes or toothpaste, just decay that festers until a barber yanks the tooth with pliers per village practices. Nowadays, you'd have fluoride and dental checkups, but in 1295, your toothbrush is a twig, and hygiene's a myth. Hands wiped on filthy tunics per customs, spreading germs like wildfire. You're tempted to chew on the other side, but every bite's a gamble, and you're picturing the village's last dentist visit, where a man's screams echoed for hours, drawing a crowd like a public hanging Watts, hovering, offering a mercury-laced tonic he swears cured his cousin. But you're dodging his pitch because his cousin's been dead a year, and you're not about to join her. You're tempted to pray for a miracle, but the healer's slicing, now blood, dripping into a bowl, and you're grimacing because this cure feels like a punishment, and you're starting to think starving in the fields might have been kinder. The village is buzzing with health talk because disease is a shadow that claims kids and adults alike, with 30% of children dying before 5 and life expectancy barely hitting 40 per records. You overhear the blacksmith's wife whispering about a fever that took her neighbor and a kid who drank healer's brew, and saw demons likely ergot from bad bread per witch hunt theories. Nowadays, you'd have antibiotics and sterile clinics. But in 1295, your pharmacy is a sack of herbs, and Watt's dubious potions, and your hospital is this mat where the healer's muttering about balancing your humors with more leeches. Each one, a slimy thief, stealing your strength per medical accounts. You're tempted to boast about surviving past 30, a village record, but you keep it low-key because bragging in 1295 is a great way to jinx it or tempt the plague. You're clutching your kids' hands, your breath shallow, and you're proud because staying alive's your rebellion. Even if it's stealing your blood and your hope, you're not reckless, though. You know, medicine's a gamble. One bad cut and infection kills you. One wrong potion, and you're gone, like the village that lost half its folk to a healer's cure per records. You're also aware of the stakes if you don't recover. Your kids starve, and your fields go fallow, leaving your family to winter's mercy. The tavern warns of fevers that turn to plague and leeches that spread rot, and you're double-checking the healer's knife like a medieval inspector because you're not letting his dirty blade betray you. You're tempted to refuse the leeches, but you settle for bargaining, 10 not 70, because defiance is a death sentence, and you've got mouths to feed. You're not blind to the risks. Filthy tools, Watt's toxic brews, and a healer who'd rather bleed than think. But you're ready, because this hut's your battlefield, and you're forging survival from pain and prayer. You're not alone, though. The village is a network of survivors, mothers, farmers, even Watt, all dodging the same plagues, sharing herbs or warnings about quacks, like the 1289 Hamlet that pooled willow bark to ease fevers per records. You trade a nod with a neighbor for her tip about boiling ale to clean wounds. Because 1295's about teamwork, and a shared remedy's a stronger village. You're tempted to dream of the Lord's physicians maybe with cleaner knives and no leeches, but you shake it off because your healer's your reality, and he's worth more than a noble's quack if he keeps you breathing. You're tempted to curse the cures. Medieval records say 40% of patients died from treatments, but you keep it cool because wasting energy's a sin, and you're not tempting fate. You're enduring blood, dripping heart steady, and you're savoring every pain-soaked, life-clinging second, because this isn't just healing. It's a medieval epic, and you're the peasant scarred, but stubborn, dodging death with leeches that steal your blood, the ordeal that burns your soul. You're still slogging through the muddy, smoky chaos of 1295 England. Edith, a weary peasant who's endured weevil-ridden pottage and ergot-laced bread, dodged plague-soaked well water with 8 pints of small ale, outmaneuvered the stench of chamber pots with a shouted Gardy-Loo plowed fields from dawn to dusk for a lord's tithe, and survived a fever with bloodletting and leeches that stole more than your strength. You've kept your kids fed your hut, livable, and your body working, clinging to the faint hope of outlasting winter's bite. You thought a courtroom nowadays, with its fines and paperwork, was an unfair hassle. Think again, because you're accused of stealing a loaf from the Lord's baker, facing a justice system that's less fair than a rigged carnival game and deadlier than the plague that killed half of Europe. You're trembling in the village square, your wool tunic itching like a swarm of fleas as a crowd gathers betting on your fate, like it's a medieval blood sport. Over 200 crimes, even chopping a tree, carry the death penalty per legal records. And proving innocence means carrying red-hot iron or sinking in a river. Per ordeal accounts, Watts whispering about nobles buying their way out, and you're tempted to confess, but torture awaits. This isn't just justice, it's a cruel lottery. And you're praying for mercy in a game rigged to burn your soul. You're in the square, a muddy patch, ringed by huts that makes a modern courthouse look like a palace, with the steward looming his velvet cloak, absurdly clean, and a priest muttering about divine judgment. Nowadays, you'd have lawyers' evidence and a presumption of innocence, but in 1295, your trial is a trial by ordeal, where God's supposed to save the guiltless per judicial customs. The steward's offering you a choice: carry a red-hot iron bar, 9 feet, praying your burns heal cleanly in 3 days to prove innocence, or face trial by watertide and tossed into the river, where sinking means you're pure but floating marks. You guilty for execution, per records. You're tempted to run, but the crowd's jeering, and Watts betting a penny. You'll float his grin wider than the village cesspit. You're dodging their taunts, your heart pounding like the blacksmith's hammer, because laws vary by village, and stealing bread could cost your hand or your life per 1295 statutes. You're praying for a miracle, but the iron's glowing, and you're starting to think starvation might have been kinder than this public spectacle. The ordeal's logic is a grim farce. Water rejects the guilty, iron spares the pure, but infection's a near certainty, making clean healing as likely as a lord sharing his feast per medical accounts. Nowadays, you'd have a jury and DNA tests. But here, your defense is surviving pain, and the crowd's treating your fate like a festival, bringing bread and ale, like it's a medieval tailgate per execution records. You're tempted to confess torture's the alternative, with racks that dislocate joints or thumb screws that crush bones per judicial logs. But confession means hanging, or worse, drawing and quartering, where you're gutted alive and hacked apart, a fate for traitors that draws bigger crowds than a village fair per chronicles. Watts muttering about nobles paying blood money to victims' families or hiring champions for trial by combat per elite customs. But you're a peasant with no coins or swordsmen, and the steward's eyeing you like you're already guilty. You're tempted to scream, but you're gripping the iron's handle, the heat searing, and you're grimacing, because this ordeal's burning more than your hands. It's torching your soul. The village is buzzing with justice talk, because every soul's seen or faced the steward's wrath with 200 crimes, from stealing to tree cutting, carrying death and public hangings, drawing picnics like a morbid holiday per records. You overhear the blacksmith's wife cackling about a thief who lost a hand for a crust and a kid who floated and burned per ordeal tales. And you're tempted to glare, but you're too busy staggering 9 feet, the iron scorching your palms. Nowadays, you'd have appeals and legal aid. But in 1295, your court is this square, and your judge is a priest who thinks God's verdict comes through blisters, not truth. You're tempted to drop the iron, but the crowd's chanting, and you're dodging. Watts' helpful advice to pray harder, because his prayers didn't save his cousin from the gallows. You're tempted to curse the steward's smirk, but rebellion's a death sentence, and you're not risking your kid's next meal for a fleeting defiance. You're not reckless, though you know justice is a gamble. One infected burn, and you're guilty. One wrong breath, and you float like the woman who sank but drowned, per records, proving innocence too late. You're also aware of the stakes. If you're convicted, your kids are orphaned and your hut seized, leaving them to winter's jaws. The tavern warns of innocents hanged for a lord's whim or tortured into false confessions, and you're double-checking your steps like a medieval tightrope walker because you're not letting this iron betray you. You're tempted to beg, but you settle for silence because pleading's a noble's trick, and you've got no velvet to back it per class divides. You're not blind to the risks. Crowd's bloodlust, Watts bets, and a steward who'd rather hang than listen. But you're ready, because this square's your battlefield, and you're forging survival from pain and faith. You're not alone, though. The village is a network of survivors, mothers farmers, even Watt, all dodging the same noose, sharing whispers of safe pleas, or priests who take bribes like the 1289 Hamlet that pooled grain to free a boy per records. You trade a glance with a neighbor for her tip about bandaging burns with boiled cloth, because 1295's about teamwork and a shared dodge is a stronger village. You're tempted to dream of the Lord's justice, maybe with coin-bought mercy and no irons, but you shake it off, because your ordeal's your reality, and it's worth more than a noble's pardon if it keeps you breathing. You're tempted to curse the system. Medieval records say 40% of trials ended in death or maiming, but you keep it cool, because wasting energy's a sin. And you're not tempting fate. You're enduring hands, blistered heart steady, and you're savoring every soul-burning, life-clinging second, because this isn't just justice, it's a medieval epic, and you're the peasant scarred, but stubborn dodging death with an ordeal that sears your soul, the war that steals your home. You're still slogging through the muddy, smoky chaos of 1295 England. Edith, a weary peasant who's endured weevil-ridden pottage, chugged small ale to dodge plague-soaked wells, outmaneuvered chamber pot stench with a shouted Gardy Lou, plowed fields for a lord's tithe, survived a fever with bloodletting leeches, and faced a burning iron ordeal to clear your name of theft. You've kept your kids, fed your hut, standing, and your spirit unbroken, clinging to the faint hope of outlasting winter's grip. You thought news of distant wars nowadays, with their TV reports and diplomatic tweets, was unsettling. Think again, because war's shadow has fallen, and a roving army's looting your crops, burning huts, and leaving starvation in its wake, like the 100 Years' War's 116-year grind per records. You're huddled in your one-room hut, your wool tunic itching like a swarm of fleas clutching your kids as soldiers clad in cloth gambesons, not shining plate ransack, your barley, per village accounts. Longbows, pierce armor from 200 yards. Sieges turn towns to rat-eating desperation, and disease kills more than swords, per Crusade's stats. Watts whispering of fleeing, and you're tempted to run, but roads mean death and staying risks slaughter. This isn't just war. It's a medieval apocalypse, and you're dodging ruin with a whisper and a prayer. You're in your hut, a drafty wattle and daub shack where the fire pit's embers flicker and the air's thick with fear and smoke. Your kids trembling as shouts echo from the village square. Nowadays, you'd watch conflicts on a screen safe in your living room, but in 1295, war's at your door, with soldiers pillaging grain and torching fields to starve you out, a tactic that left villages ghost towns per chronicles. You're peeking through a crack in the wall, your heart pounding like the village mill as men in padded gambesons, not the costly plate armor of knights per equipment records, steal your harvest, their longbows slung across backs, each capable of punching through oak at 200 yards per battle accounts. You're tempted to confront them. But battles like Towton in 1461 killed $28,000 in a day, many frozen in snow, before swords clashed per records, and a peasant's defiance means a quick blade or a burning hut. You're dodging the urge to scream your kids' eyes wide, and you're praying the soldiers move on, because staying means risking a siege. Paris in 885, 8 rats, and worse, per siege, logs. And fleeing means starvation on bandit-riddled roads. Disease is war's deadliest shadow, killing more than arrows, with armies breeding filth that fells half their men before battle per Crusade's data. Nowadays, you'd have vaccines and hospitals, but in 1295, your medicine is a rag soaked in ale and dysentery, or smallpox could sweep your village faster than the soldiers' torches per health records. You're tempted to barricade the door. But Watt's muttering about a siege nearby, where a castle held out for months, its folk eating leather, and tapestries, per siege accounts. And you're picturing your kids gnawing boots. You're dodging Watt's plan to flee to the hills. His last scheme landed him in a ditch, and you're not trusting his navigation per his gong farming mishaps. You're tempted to hide your grain, but soldiers sniff out caches like hounds, and you're praying they spare your hut, because losing it means winter's a death sentence, and you're not ready to bury your kids in the snow. The village is buzzing with war talk, because every soul's felt the soldier's boot, with tales of razed hamlets and sieges lasting years. Like Candia's 21-year ordeal per records, you overhear the blacksmith's wife whispering about a village slaughtered men, women, kids, no mercy per chronicles, and a farmer who fled only to starve, and you're tempted to cry, but you're too busy hiding your last barley sack under the straw, your hands shaking like the village bell. Nowadays, you'd have refugee aid or insurance, but in 1295, your safety net is a neighbor's whisper or a shared crust, and you're dodging Watt's helpful offer to guard your hut for a cut of your grain, because his loyalty's as shaky as his cart per gossip. You're tempted to boast about saving half your crop, but you keep it low-key, because flaunting your stash in 1295 is a great way to draw thieves or soldiers. You're clutching your kids, your breath shallow, and you're proud because keeping them alive's your defiance, even if war's stealing your home and your hope. You're not reckless, though you know war's a gamble. One wrong move and soldiers burn your hut. One bad choice, and you're starving on the road, like the 1289 village that fled and vanished per records. You're also aware of the stakes. If you lose your home, your kids face winter with nothing, and you're not letting that happen. The tavern warns of armies that slaughter for sport, or sieges that turn neighbors to cannibals, and you're double-checking your hiding spot like a medieval strategist, because you're not letting these soldiers betray you. You're tempted to fight, but you settle for silence, because defiance is a noble's game, and you've got no sword to play it per class divides. You're not blind to the risks torched fields, diseased camps, and Watt's schemes that smell worse than his cart. But you're ready, because this hut's your fortress, and you're forging survival from fear and cunning. You're not alone, though. The village is a network of survivors, mothers, farmers, even Watt, all dodging the same swords, sharing whispers of safe paths or hidden caches, like the 1289 hamlet that pooled grain to outlast a raid per records. You trade a glance with a neighbor for her tip about burying food in the woods, because 1295's about teamwork and a shared secret's a stronger village. You're tempted to dream of the Lord's castle, maybe safe behind stone walls, but you shake it off because your hut's your reality, and it's worth more than a noble's keep if it shelters your kids. You're tempted to curse the war. Medieval records say 40% of villages were razed in conflicts, but you keep it cool because wasting energy's a sin and you're not tempting fate. You're hiding heart-pounding spirit unbroken, and you're savoring every fear soaked life-clinging second. Because this isn't just survival, it's a medieval epic, and you're the peasant scarred but stubborn, guarding your home against a war that steals everything. The village that smells like despair. You're still slogging through the muddy, smoky chaos of 1295 England. Edith, a weary peasant who's endured weevil-ridden pottage, chugged small ale to dodge plague-soaked wells, mastered chamber pot dumps with a shouted Gardy Lou, plowed fields for a lord's tithe, survived leeches and bloodletting. For a fever, cleared your name in a scorching iron ordeal, and hidden from soldiers looting your crops in a war's brutal wake. You've kept your kids fed your hut, standing, and your spirit unbroken, clinging to the faint hope of outlasting winter's claws. You thought your cramped apartment nowadays, with its thin walls and noisy neighbors, was a privacy nightmare. Think again, because you're living in a one-room hut where every meal, sleep, and squabble's a public affair. The village reeks of waste-tanning urine and despair, and lice are your closest roommates per hygiene accounts. Entertainments watching executions or bear-baiting superstition fuels witch scares, and the feudal system locks you in as a peasant, 90% of the population, per records, with no escape. You're scratching your scalp, your wool tunic itching like a swarm of fleas, dodging Watt's herb pouch to mask the stench. And you're tempted to scream, but ale's your only solace. This isn't just living. It's a medieval endurance test, and you're a survivor, scarred but stubborn, in a world that smells like doom. You're in your hut, a wattle and daub shack, where the fire pit smoke chokes the air and a single straw pallet crams you. Your kids, and the occasional traveler per household records, making privacy a fairy tale. Nowadays, you'd have locked doors and noise-canceling headphones. But in 1295, your bedroom is this dirt-floored room where snores, farts, and your neighbor's midnight pot dumping echo like a grim symphony per village accounts. You're tempted to shush your kids' chatter, but they're swapping tales of witches' village gossip. Says old Meg's a sorceress because her cow died per superstition logs, and you're dodging their lice combed out with a bone tool that's more hope than help per grooming records. The village's stench is a beast-human waste. Butcher's blood-tanning vats urine and smoke from every hearth per urban descriptions, so thick you're clutching a rag to your nose, wishing for Watt's posy of herbs, a medieval air freshener that barely dents the reek per custom notes. You're tempted to flee to the fields, but the mud's worse, and you're praying for a breeze that doesn't carry the river's monster of stink. Life's a public stage, with no corner to hide your thoughts or tears. Unlike today's private homes and personal spaces, you're washing twice a year per hygiene accounts because bathing's a disease risk per medieval beliefs in a bucket shared with your kids, while Watt's peeking through the door, his gong farming tales as unwelcome as his smell. You're tempted to dream of the Lord's manor, maybe with curtains and fewer lice, but 90% of the village are peasants like you, chained to the feudal ladder's bottom, per population, stats with no climb possible. Your clothes, 2 rough linen shifts, and a wool tunic itch like a punishment, rarely washed and worn to tatters per wardrobe records. Unlike today's closets of soft cotton and weekly laundry, you're dodging Watt's gift of a lice comb because his generosity comes with a leer, and you're tempted to snap it, but you need every tool, and you're not wasting a chance to scrape off the crawlers that make your scalp a battlefield. Entertainment's no escape. It's blood-soaked with public hangings, drawing crowds like a modern concert, complete with ale and bread, per execution records, or bear baiting, where dogs tear at chained beasts per village pastimes. You're tempted to stay home, but staring at your hut's walls is grimmer. And the kids beg for a bard's tale, a rare treat that's months away, per traveling performer logs. Superstitions your village's heartbeat, eclipses spark end-of-world panics, and Meg's witch label could burn her per witch hunt accounts, making you watch your words, because a stray curse could mark you next. The village buzzes with fear from demon tales to bad air, causing plagues per belief records, and you're tempted to scoff, but you're too busy checking the sky for omens, because in 1295, doubt's a luxury, and you're not risking a curse. You're clutching your ale jug, your kids whispering, and you're proud, because surviving this village's despair is your rebellion, even if it smells like a sewer and feels like a cage. You're not reckless, though you know life's a gamble. One wrong word, and you're a witch. One bad day, and lice or hunger win, like the 1295 village that lost half its folk to plague per records. You're also aware of the stakes. If you falter, your kids face winter's hunger, and you're not letting that happen. The tavern warns of witches burned and kids lost to filth, and you're double-checking your words like a medieval diplomat because you're not letting gossip betray you. You're tempted to hide, but you settle for blending in because standing out's a noble's game, and you've got no velvet to play it per class divides. You're not blind to the risks, mob panics, Watts leers, and a lord who'd tax your breath, but you're ready because this village is your crucible, and you're forging survival from filth and fear. You're not alone, though. The village is a network of grit mothers, farmers, even Watt, all dodging the same stench, and scares sharing whispers of safe herbs or witch-proof prayers like the 1289 hamlet that pooled rags to fend off lice per records. You trade a nod with a neighbor for her trick of airing tunics to kill fleas. Because 1295's about teamwork and a shared hacks, a stronger village. You're tempted to dream of the Lord's halls, maybe with clean air and no shared beds. But you shake it off, because your hut's your reality, and it's worth more than a noble's manor, if it shelters your kids. You're tempted to curse the despair. Medieval records say 40% of peasants died from disease or want, but you keep it cool because wasting energy's a sin, and you're not tempting fate. You're enduring ale in hand, spirit steady, and you're savoring every despair-soaked, life-clinging second, because this isn't just living, it's a medieval epic. And you're the peasant, scarred, but stubborn, thriving, in a village that smells like doom. How medieval peasants kept hygiene without soap. The river. That's your spa. Welcome to 1295. Marjorie, a weathered peasant in a muddy English village, where your bathroom's a riverbank, your soap's a fantasy, and staying clean's a battle against filth that'd make a pig blush. You thought your cramped shower stall nowadays, with its dribbling water-pressure dollar store body wash, and that one mildew spot you can't scrub out, was a hygiene hassle. Think again, because you're trudging to the village's spa, a murky stretch of river that's half water, half cow dung, with a fishy whiff that could knock out a horse per archaeological records of riverside washing platforms. You're wading into the chilly current, your wool tunic itching like a flea market reject, clutching a ragged cloth as the water tugs at your knees, while Watt the gong farmer cackles from the shore, his stench a grim reminder of what happens if you skip a dip. The village is buzzing with bath day gossip, women swapping tales of wayward husbands, men splashing after a day in the fields, per 13th century accounts. And you're tempted to turn back, but Sunday's church service looms, and you're not about to face the priest, smelling like last week's pottage, or risk the steward's sneer. This isn't just bathing. It's a medieval plunge, and you're dodging muck, gossip, and Watts leers. With a smirk, a shiver, and a prayer, you're at the river's edge, a muddy bank lined with crude wooden platforms and benches that make a modern community pool look like a luxury resort. The water, a brownish soup, swirling with leaves, animal waste, and whatever the tanners dumped upstream per village hygiene records. Nowadays, you'd have a hot shower with adjustable jets and a playlist to make washing a breeze. But in 1295, your shower is this river, where the only jets are the current's pull and the occasional frog bumping your shin. You're stripping to your linen shift, your hands raw from plowing as the village women gather their chatter, louder than the mill's creak, sharing who's courting who or which lord's raising taxes per social accounts of communal bathing. You're tempted to dunk and dash, but bathing's a ritual, especially before church, when the priest's sermon on cleanliness stings worse than the water's chill, per ecclesiastical notes. You're dodging Watt's offer to guard your tunic for a sip of your ale, his grin as trustworthy as a fox in a henhouse. And you're praying the river's flow cleaner than standing water. Per medieval wisdom, won't leave you sicker than when you started. You're not naive, though. You know river bathing's a gamble. One wrong step, and you're slipping into a dung patch. One bad dunk, and you're swallowing something that'll have you praying for death, like the village kid who gulped river water and didn't see harvest per health records. You're wading downstream from the drinking water spot, a trick peasants learned the hard way, per archaeological evidence of designated washing zones, because nobody wants to sip what you're scrubbing off. You're tempted to skip the dip. The water's cold enough to freeze a saint's piety, and the crowd's eyeing your every splash, like it's village theater, but you're rubbing your arms with a cloth because a clean face means respect, and you're not letting Watt's taunts or the steward's taxes strip your dignity. You're picturing the miller's complaint from a 13th century record griping about naked bodies clogging his water wheel, and you're chuckling because your bath's already drawing stares from the men splashing upstream, their field dirt clouds drifting your way. You're tempted to curse the river's muck, but you're scrubbing your teeth, chattering, and you're proud because this dips your defiance against a world that wants you filthy. The village is a hive of bath day talk because every soul's fighting the same grime from the blacksmith's soot to the tanner's urine stink, and the river's the only place to shed it per communal records. You overhear the blacksmith's wife boasting about her hot bath trick soaking in a bucket warmed by the hearth, a luxury you can't afford, and a kid whining about slipping on the platform per gossip accounts. Nowadays, you'd have private bathrooms and scented soaps. But in 1295, your spa is this public bank where women gossip about Watt's latest gong farming blunder, and men trade tips on dodging the bathing warden a grump, who ensures no one hogs the best spots per 1367 court records. You're tempted to claim a prime platform, but the warden's glaring, and you're dodging his stick because hogging's a fine, and you're not wasting your 2-penny wage on his temper. You're tempted to boast about your clean shift, a rare win, but you keep it low-key because flaunting your hygiene in 1295 is a great way to draw Watt's help or a jealous neighbor's splash. You're scrubbing your skin tingling, and you're proud because this river's your battlefield, even if it's a murky, smelly one. You're not reckless, though you know the river's a gamble. One bad current, and you're swept downstream. One wrong swallow, and you're bedridden like the 1295 outbreak that felled half a village from tainted water per plague records. You're also aware of the stakes. If you don't clean up, the priest's scorn or the village's gossip could mark you as unclean, costing you trade or respect per social customs. The tavern warns of bathers who caught chills or worse, and you're double-checking your footing like a medieval tightrope walker because you're not letting this river betray you. You're tempted to linger, soaking in the chatter, but you settle for a quick scrub because dawdling risks a cold, and you've got fields to plow and kids to feed. You're not blind to the risks. Slippery banks, Watts leers, and a warden who'd fine you for breathing. But you're ready because this riverbank's your arena, and you're forging cleanliness from muck and courage. You're not alone, though. The village is a network of splashers, mothers, farmers, even Watt, all battling the same grime-sharing rags or warnings about slick rocks, like the 1289 hamlet that built a communal platform to ease bathing per records. You trade a nod with a neighbor for her tip about bathing after rain when the river runs clearer, because 1295's about teamwork and a shared hack's a cleaner village. You're tempted to dream of the Lord's bathhouse, maybe with warm water and no cow dung, but you shake it off because this river's your reality, and it's worth more than a noble's tub if it keeps you presentable. You're tempted to curse the chill medieval records, say 40% of winter bathers caught fevers, but you keep it cool because wasting energy's a sin, and you're not tempting fate. You're wading out, rag-dripping spirit, unbroken, and you're savoring every chilly muck-soaked second because this isn't just bathing. It's a medieval epic, and you're the peasant, scarred but stubborn, turning a river into a spa that guards your pride. The ashes that scour your skin. You're still slogging through the muddy, smoky chaos of 1295 England. Marjorie, a weathered peasant who's just braved the village's spa, a murky river swirling with cow dung and fishy whiffs to scrub off the grime of fieldwork and pottage fumes, outsmarting what the gong farmer's leers and the bathing warden's stick to emerge clean for Sunday's church. You've waded through chilly currents, dodged the steward's taxes, and kept your linen shift spotless, clinging to the faint hope of a moment's dignity in a world that wants you filthy. You thought your fancy exfoliating scrub nowadays with its microbeads, lavender scent, and sleek bottle was a skin-saving miracle. Think again, because you're now crouched by your hut's fire pit, mixing wood ash, your village's secret weapon packed with potassium carbonate per medieval cleaning manuals to scour the stubborn dirt no river could lift. You're stirring a gritty paste, your wool tunic itching like a flea market reject, dodging Watt's expert advice to add his finest urine for an ammonia kick per 13th century recipes. The village buzzes with ash-trading gossip, the steward sniffing for unpaid dues, and you're tempted to dunk your head in the pot. But a clean body means respect, and you're not letting Watt's stench or the river's muck win. This isn't just cleaning, it's medieval alchemy, and you're turning trash into triumph with a scouring grit that burns like ambition. You're in your one-room hut, a drafty wattle and daub shack, where the fire pit's embers crackle, and the air's thick with smoke and the faint reek of yesterday's pottage. Your kids huddled nearby, eyeing the ash pile you've swept from the hearth. Nowadays, you'd grab a bar of soap or a foaming gel to wash away sweat and field dirt. But in 1295, your soap is this ash scraped from oak logs because it's finer and less staining than birch per village lore. And you're mixing it with water to make a paste that breaks down grease like a medieval curse per chemical analyses of ash residues. You're tempted to use plain water, but the river left a gritty film on your arms, and ash is your only shot at not smelling like Watt's gong cart, which clears a path through the village square per hygiene accounts. You're rubbing the paste on your hands raw from plowing, wincing as it stings your knuckles, and you're dodging Watt's pitch to add urine. It's nature's cleaner, he swears, citing ammonia's bite per cleaning manuals, because you'd rather smell like smoke than his finest brew. You're praying the mix doesn't burn too much, because a rash now means a week of itching, and you're not risking that before church. The ash game's no simple chore. It's a village obsession, with every hut hoarding its best for cleaning or trade, like the Agnes ash gatherer, who built a tidy living swapping oak ash per 1386 court records. Nowadays, you'd have skincare aisles with curated scrubs, but here your aisle is the hearth, and your brand is whatever wood you burned last, with oak as the gold standard for its white powdery yield per pottery residue studies. You're tempted to use birch ash, Watts pushing a sack he borrowed from the miller, but oak's your pride, and you're dodging his offer like you dodge his gong cart's fumes. You're picturing the 1342 court case where a neighbor was fined for stealing ash, a medieval crime that sparked a tavern brawl per records, and you're chuckling because your own pile's under guard from Watt's sticky fingers. You're tempted to barter for a pinch of rosemary to mix in herbs, add scent, and kill germs per archaeological finds, but your barley's for bread, and you're not trading food for frills. You're rubbing your skin, tingling like you've danced too close to the fire, and you're proud because this ash is your shield against the village's stench, even if it scours your patience along with your skin. The village is a hive of ash talk, because every soul's battling the same grime, from the blacksmith's soot to the tanner's urine reek, and a good ash mix is a status symbol per communal records. You overhear the blacksmith's wife bragging about her secret ash herb blend, claiming it outshines the priest's, and a kid whining about burning his hands with a bad batch per gossip accounts. Nowadays, you'd have dermatologist-approved cleansers, but in 1295, your spa is this hearth, where women trade ash recipes like modern chefs, swap spice blends, and men argue over which wood's best per social customs. You're tempted to join the chatter, but Watt's hovering offering a premium mix that smells suspiciously like his cart, and you're dodging his deal because his last gift left your hands red for a week. You're tempted to boast about your oak ash, a rare haul from a fallen branch, but you keep it low-key because flaunting your stash in 1295 is a great way to draw Watt's borrowing or a neighbor's envy. You're mixing your fingers gritty, and you're proud because this pastes your rebellion against a world that wants you reeking like a barnyard. You're not reckless, though you know ash is a gamble. One bad mix, and you're nursing burns. One wrong herb, and you're itching worse than Watt's lice, like the 1295 villager who used pine ash and couldn't work for days per health records. You're also aware of the stakes if you don't clean up the priest's sermon on unclean souls hits harder, and village trade shuns the smelly per social accounts. The tavern warns of ash that stung, or herbs that turned sour, and you're double-checking your mix like a medieval chemist, because you're not letting Watt's dodgy urine betray you. You're tempted to rush, but you settle for a careful stir because haste is a scrub's worst enemy, and you've got kids to feed and fields to plow. You're not blind to the risks, stinging pastes, Watt schemes, and a steward who'd tax your ash if he could. But you're ready, because this hearth's your crucible, and you're forging cleanliness from soot and sweat. You're not alone, though. The village is a network of ash mixers, mothers, farmers, even Watt, all battling the same filth, sharing pinches of sage or warnings about Birch's bite, like the 1289 Hamlet that pooled ash to outlast a lean winter per records. You trade a nod with a neighbor for her trick of adding mint for scent, because 1295's about teamwork, and a shared recipe's a cleaner village. You're tempted to dream of the Lord's soaps, maybe scented with roses and no grit, but you shake it off, because your ash is your reality, and it's worth more than a noble's lather if it keeps you presentable. You're tempted to curse the sting medieval records say 40% of ash users got rashes from bad mixes, but you keep it cool because wasting energy's a sin, and you're not tempting fate. You're scouring hands, burning spirit steady, and you're savoring every gritty skin-saving second, because this isn't just cleaning. It's a medieval epic, and you're the peasant, scarred but stubborn, turning ashes into a scour that guards your pride, the comb that hunts your lice. You're still slogging through the muddy, smoky chaos of 1295 England. Marjorie, a weathered peasant who's braved the village's murky river spa to scrub off field grime, outsmarting what the gong farmer's leers and the bathing warden's stick, then scoured your skin with oak ash paste, dodging Watt's rancid urine enhancer to emerge clean enough for Sunday's church. You've kept your linen shift spotless, your dignity intact, and your hope flickering, despite the steward's taxes and the village's stench. You thought your high-end shampoo nowadays, with its sulfate-free foam and glossy bottle, was a hair care essential. Think again, because you're now perched on a wobbly stool in your smoky hut, wielding a bone comb. Your delousing dagger per archaeological finds to tame a lice-infested tangle no river rinse could conquer. You're steeping rosemary and bay leaves in vinegar for a lice-repelling rinse per 13th century recipes. Your wool tunic itching like a flea market. Reject dodging Watt's premium urine rinse to lighten your locks. The village women gather braiding and delousing like a grim salon per social accounts, and you're tempted to chop it all off. But a clean scalp's your pride, and you're not letting Watt's stench or the village's gossip win. This isn't just grooming, it's a lice hunting quest, and you're battling bugs with a comb, a curse, and a grimace. You're in your one-room hut, a drafty wattle and daub shack where the fire pit's embers glow and the air's thick with smoke and the faint whiff of yesterday's pottage. Your kids hovering as you unravel your hair. A knotted mess that's home to more lice than the village has rumors. Nowadays, you'd lather up with a floral shampoo and a massaging scalp brush. But in 1295, your shampoo is a vinegar brew, steeped with rosemary and bay leaves. Their insecticidal oils, a medieval weapon against the crawlers that make your scalp a battlefield per recipe books. You're pouring it on your eyes, stinging like you've walked through Watt's gong cart fumes. And you're tempted to skip the rinse, but lice are a village scarlet letter, and you're not facing the priest's raised eyebrow at church per social customs. You're yanking your comb's fine teeth crafted for snagging eggs per 9th century finds through knots. Each tug, a jolt of pain that'd make a modern spa-goer faint. And you're dodging Watt's offer of a brightening urine rinse, claiming it'll make your hair glow like a noble's per grooming lore. You're praying the vinegar works, because a louse sighting now means gossip that'll outlast your barley crop. The comb's no toy. It's a two-sided marvel one end with wide teeth for detangling the other with needle-fine teeth that hunt lice like a medieval bounty hunter found in homes, from peasants to palaces per archaeological records. Nowadays, you'd have electric clippers or detangling sprays. But here, your salon is this stool, and your stylist is your neighbor, Agnes, whose deft hands braid while picking nits, turning your hut into a grim beauty parlor, per communal accounts. You're tempted to hand her the comb, but Agnes's help comes with a lecture on your neglected scalp, and you're dodging her judgment like you dodge Watt's stench. You're picturing the village women's delousing circle, a ritual where gossip flows faster than the river, whose husband's straying, who's shorted the Lord's tithe per social records, and you're tempted to join, but Watt's lurking, offering a deal on a bone comb he found likely pilfered from the miller per 1389 court disputes. You're tempted to curse the lice, but you're combing your scalp screaming, and you're proud because a clean head's your shield against a village that sniffs out shame. The village is a hive of hair care talk, because every soul's battling the same crawlers, from the blacksmith's soot-caked mane to the tanner's urine-soaked locks, and a good comb's worth more than a week's wages per trade accounts. You overhear the blacksmith's wife bragging about her lavender rinse, claiming it outshines the priest's prayers, and a kid whining about a comb that snapped mid-knit per gossip logs. Nowadays, you'd have lice treatments and blow dryers. But in 1295, your treatment is this vinegar burning like a sinner's conscience, and your dryer is the hut's smoky air per hygiene practices. You're tempted to trade for Agnes's sage. She swears it kills eggs faster, but your barley's for bread, and you're not swapping food for frills. You're dodging Watt's premium rinse, which smells like his cart and probably came from it, and you're tempted to dunk him in the river. But his gossip's worse than his stench, and you're not risking a village feud. You're combing your fingers, cramping, and you're proud because this scalp's your battlefield, even if it's a louse-ridden war zone. You're not reckless, though you know hair care's a gamble. One bad rinse and your scalp's raw. One missed egg and you're crawling again, like the 1295 villager shunned for a lice outbreak per health records. You're also aware of the stakes. If you don't look clean, the priest's sermon on unclean souls hits harder, and village trade shuns the infested per social accounts. The tavern warns of rinses that burned or combs that broke, and you're double-checking your vinegar's strength like a medieval apothecary, because you're not letting Watt's dodgy brew betray you. You're tempted to rush, but you settle for slow pulls, because haste is a louse's best friend, and you've got kids to feed and fields to plow. You're not blind to the risks scalding vinegar, Watt's schemes, and a neighbor who'd snitch for a barley sack, but you're ready because this hut's your salon, and you're forging cleanliness from herbs and grit. You're not alone, though. The village is a network of NIT pickers, mothers weavers, even Watt, all battling the same bugs, sharing combs or sage sprigs like the 1289 hamlet that pooled rosemary to fend off an outbreak per records. You trade a nod with Agnes for her trick of steeping bay leaves longer, because 1295's about teamwork, and a shared hack's a cleaner village. You're tempted to dream of the Lord-scented oils, maybe with no vinegar sting, but you shake it off, because your comb's your reality, and it's worth more than a noble's rinse if it keeps you respectable. You're tempted to curse the pain. Medieval records say 40% of villagers battled lice yearly, but you keep it cool because wasting energy's a sin, and you're not tempting fate. You're combing scalp, burning spirit steady, and you're savoring every knit-snagging, pride-saving second, because this isn't just grooming. It's a medieval epic, and you're the peasant scarred but stubborn hunting lice with a comb that guards your honor, the twig that saves your smile. You're still slogging through the muddy, smoky chaos of 1295 England. Marjorie, a weathered peasant, who's braved the village's murky river spa to scrub off field grime, scoured your skin with oak ash paste, to banish barnyard stink, and battled lice with a bone comb and rosemary vinegar rinse, outsmarting Watt's urine-soaked schemes and the village's gossip to keep your dignity intact for Sunday's church. You've kept your linen shift spotless, your scalp knit free, and your hope flickering despite the steward's taxes and the village's reek. You thought your electric toothbrush nowadays, with its minty paste whitening mode and vibrating hum, was a dental must-have. Think again, because you're now chewing a cherry twig to fray it into a makeshift brush, scrubbing your teeth with a gritty powder of crushed eggshells and chalk, maybe spiked with mouse bones per 1385 court records, to fend off decay in a village where a toothache is a scream fest, and no dentists in sight. Per 1321 monastic logs, you're perched in your smoky hut, your wool tunic itching like a flea market reject, dodging Watt's spiced tooth powder that smells like a swamp per medical texts. The village buzzes with tales of yanked teeth and foul breath, and you're tempted to skip it, but a clean smile's your charm, and you're not letting Watt's stench or the priest's glare win. This isn't just brushing, it's a medieval dental duel, and you're fighting rot with a twig, a grimace, and a prayer. You're in your one-room hut, a drafty wattle and daub shack, where the fire pit's embers sputter, and the air's thick with smoke, and the faint tang of pottage, your kids hovering as you chew the twig's end, softening it into a frayed brush that scrapes your teeth per monastic hygiene records. Nowadays, you'd zip through a 2-minute brush with fluoride paste and a dentist's number on speed dial. But in 1295, your toothbrush is this cherry branch plucked from a tree, the village nearly stripped bare, per 1321 accounts. Its natural compounds, fighting bacteria per modern studies. You're mixing a powder eggshells for calcium chalk for grit per medieval recipes. Your fingers dusty as you dodge. Watt's offer of a premium blend, ground with mouse bones and frog legs, he swears, claiming its noble grade, though it reeks like his gong cart per apothecary logs. You're tempted to use plain water, but decay's a village curse, turning smiles to gaps that draw stares at church per social customs. And you're not risking the priest's sermon on unclean souls or the baker's refusal to trade with a rotten-mouthed woman. You're scraping your gums, stinging like you've bitten a sour apple, and you're praying the powder doesn't crack a tooth. Because a barber's pliers are your only fix, and his surgery echoes screams across the square. The twig's no toy. It's a dental lifeline, aromatic and tough, unlike the noble's clove and mint powders that cost more than your yearly wage per 1374 household accounts. Nowadays, you'd have whitening strips and mouthwash. But here, your whitening is this chalky grit, and your rinse is a swig of vinegar spiked with mint, a breath freshener that burns like a sinner's conscience per dental practices. You're tempted to skip the scrub. Every scrape feels like a duel with your own mouth. But a toothache's a death knell, with no painkillers, and barbers who yank teeth like they're pulling weeds per village records. You're picturing the village's last dental visit, where a man's wails drew a crowd bigger than a hanging per gossip accounts, and you're dodging Watt's helpful powder, likely cut with swamp muck, because his last cure left a kid spitting for days per tavern tales. You're tempted to barter for Agnes's sage. She swears it kills rot faster, but your barley's for bread, and you're not trading food for frills. You're rubbing your jaw, aching, and you're proud, because a clean smile's your shield against a village that sniffs out shame, even if it's a gritty, painful fight. The village is a hive of dental talk, because every soul's dodging the same rot, from the blacksmith's ale-stained teeth to the tanner's decay from urine fumes, and a good powder's worth more than a week's wages per trade logs. You overhear the blacksmith's wife bragging about her secret mint rinse, claiming it outshines the priest's prayers, and a kid whining about a twig that splintered per gossip accounts. Nowadays, you'd have dental clinics and floss. But in 1295, your clinic is this stool, and your dentist is Agnes, who's inspecting your teeth like a livestock trader muttering about neglect per communal hygiene notes. You're tempted to snap at her, but her sage rinse tip saved your breath last month, and you're dodging her judgment like you dodge Watt's stench. You're tempted to boast about your cherry twig, a rare find from a storm-felled branch, but you keep it low-key, because flaunting your dental kit in 1295 is a great way to draw Watt's borrowing or Agnes's envy. You're scrubbing your gums, throbbing, and you're proud, because these teeth are your charm, even if they're fighting a war against decay. You're not reckless, though you know dental care's a gamble. One bad twig, and you're spitting splinters. One wrong powder, and you're gagging like the 1295 villager who used a mousebone mix and lost a tooth per health records. You're also aware of the stakes. If your smile goes the village's gossip brands, you foul costing you trade or respect per social accounts. The tavern warns of powders that burn gums or barbers who yank the wrong tooth, and you're double-checking your mix like a medieval alchemist because you're not letting Watt's swampy blend betray you. You're tempted to rush, but you settle for slow scrapes because haste is a tooth's worst enemy, and you've got kids to feed and fields to plow. You're not blind to the risks, cracked teeth, Watt's scams, and a priest who'd shame you for a gap, but you're ready because this hut's your dental clinic, and you're forging cleanliness from chalk and grit. You're not alone, though. The village is a network of tooth scrubbers, mothers, weavers, even what all, battling the same rot, sharing mint sprigs or warnings about bad chalk, like the 1289 Hamlet that pooled sage to fend off decay per records. You trade a nod with Agnes for her trick of mixing cloves for breath, because 1295's about teamwork, and a shared hack's a cleaner village. You're tempted to dream of the Lord's spice powders, maybe with no chalky grit, but you shake it off because your twig's your reality, and it's worth more than a noble's rinse if it keeps you smiling. You're tempted to curse the sting. Medieval records say 40% of villagers lost teeth to bad care, but you keep it cool because wasting energy's a sin, and you're not tempting fate. You're brushing gums, burning spirit steady, and you're savoring every gritty smile-saving second because this isn't just dental care. It's a medieval epic, and you're the peasant, scarred but stubborn, guarding your charm with a twig that saves your smile. The herbs that freshen your feet. You're still slogging through the muddy, smoky chaos of 1295 England. Marjorie, a weathered peasant who's braved the village's murky river spa to scrub off field grime, scoured your skin with oak ash, paste-battled lice with a bone comb and rosemary rinse, and chewed a cherry twig to fend off tooth decay, outsmarting Watt's swampy schemes and the village's gossip to keep your body and smile church-ready. You've kept your linen shift spotless, your scalp knit-free, your teeth intact, and your hope flickering, despite the steward's taxes and the village's reek. You thought your odor-eating insoles nowadays, with their gel cushions and charcoal layers, were a foot care godsend. Think again, because you're now stuffing mint and rosemary into your thin leather shoes, because barefoot fields and muddy paths leave your feet reeking Like Watt's gong cart, per 1378 cobbler guides, you're rubbing your soles with dried clay to soak sweat. A soldier's trick, per 1385 military records, your wool tunic, itching like a flea market reject, dodging Watt's premium foot clay that's half dirt. The village buzzes with tales of smelly feet and bathhouse finds, and you're tempted to go barefoot forever. But clean feet mean respect, and you're not letting Watt's stench or the priest's glare win. This isn't just foot care. It's a medieval march, and you're freshening your soles with herbs, clay, and a grimace. You're in your one-room hut, a drafty wattle and daub shack where the fire pit's embers glow and the air's thick with smoke and pottage fumes. Your kids giggling as you sit on a wobbly stool, massaging your calloused feet, battered from barefoot treks through fields that make modern trails look like velvet carpets, per skeletal studies showing peasants' sturdy foot bones. Nowadays, you'd slip into cushioned sneakers with breathable mesh, but in 1295, your shoes are flimsy leather soles, more holes than hide per cobbler accounts, and you're stuffing them with mint and rosemary. They're antibacterial oils, a medieval shield against the funk of sweat and mud, per 1378 hygiene guides. You're tempted to skip the herbs. Your feet ache like you've danced on coals, but smelly feet draw glares at church, where the priest's nose is sharper than his sermons per social customs, and you're not risking a scolding or a bathhouse ban, where the foot inspector finds the foul per 1367 court records. You're rubbing clay, your toes gritty, and you're dodging Watt's foot clay deal, likely scooped from a ditch, because his last bargain left Agnes's feet red per tavern tales. Going barefoot's your norm. Fields and paths toughen your soles better than any noble's boots, per archaeological evidence of healthier peasant feet. But shoes are a must for church, and yours reek like a tanner's vat after a day's plow per village complaints. Nowadays, you'd have foot powders and pedicures. But here, your spa is this clay, dried and crushed, to soak moisture like a soldier's march saver per military logs, and you're sprinkling it in praying. It doesn't clump like Watt's last batch per gossip accounts. You're tempted to let your feet breathe, but the bathhouse warden's stick stings worse than the steward's fines, and you're dodging his patrols like you dodge Watt's stench, which could scatter a flock of geese. You're picturing the 1367 court case where a farmer bribed the inspector with a chicken to pass a foot check per records, and you're chuckling because your mint's a better bribe if only you could spare it. You're tempted to barter for Agnes's time. She swears it kills odor faster, but you're barley's for bread, and you're not trading food for frills. You're massaging your soles, throbbing, and you're proud because clean feet are your badge, even if they're a muddy, sweaty fight. The village is a hive of foot care talk because every soul's dodging the same funk, from the blacksmith's soot-crusted toes to the tanner's urine-soaked heels, and a fresh foot's worth more than a day's wage per trade logs. You overhear the blacksmith's wife bragging about her secret sage stuffing, claiming it outshines the priest's incense, and a kid whining about clay that scratched per gossip accounts. Nowadays, you'd have antifungal creams and podiatrists. But in 1295, your doctor is this herb stash, and your clinic is this stool, where Agnes is inspecting your feet like a livestock trader, muttering about neglect per communal hygiene notes. You're tempted to snap at her, but her rosemary tip saved your shoes last month, and you're dodging her judgment like you dodge Watt's cart. You're tempted to boast about your mint haul, a rare find from a meadow patch, but you keep it low-key because flaunting your foot care in 1295 is a great way to draw Watt's borrowing or Agnes's envy. You're stuffing your fingers dusty, and you're proud, because these feet are your march, even if they're a gritty, aching slog. You're not reckless, though. Foot care's a gamble. One bad herb, and your shoes reek. One wrong clay, and you're itching, like the 1295 villager who used ditch dirt and limped for weeks per health records. You're also aware of the stakes. If your feet stink, the bathhouse bans. You, and village trade, shuns the foul per social accounts. The tavern warns of clays that burned, or herbs that molded, and you're double-checking your mint like a medieval apothecary because you're not letting Watt's dodgy dirt betray you. You're tempted to rush, but you settle for careful packing because haste is a foot's worst enemy, and you've got kids to feed and fields to plow. You're not blind to the risks, rotten herbs, Watt scams, and a warden who'd fine you for a whiff. But you're ready because this hut's your foot care clinic, and you're forging cleanliness from clay and grit. You're not alone, though. The village is a network of foot fresheners, mothers, drovers, even Watt, all battling the same stink, sharing sage sprigs or warnings about bad clay, like the 1289 Hamlet that pooled mint to fend off a bathhouse ban per records. You trade a nod with Agnes for her trick of drying time longer, because 1295's about teamwork, and a shared hack's a cleaner village. You're tempted to dream of the Lord's silk-lined boots, maybe with no sweaty funk. But you shake it off, because your herbs are your reality, and they're worth more than a noble's souls if they keep you walking. You're tempted to curse the ache. Medieval records say 40% of peasants had foot sores from bad care. But you keep it cool because wasting energy's a sin, and you're not tempting fate. You're rubbing feet, tingling spirit steady, and you're savoring every herb-stuffed, odor-fighting second, because this isn't just foot care. It's a medieval epic, and you're the peasant scarred but stubborn, freshening your feet with herbs that guard your pride, the pomander that masks your stink. You're still slogging through the muddy, smoky chaos of 1295 England. Marjorie, a weathered peasant who's braved the village's murky river spa to scrub off field grime, scoured your skin with oak ash paste, battled lice with a bone comb, chewed a cherry twig to save your smile, and stuffed mint into your shoes to keep your feet from rivaling Watt's gong cart stench. You've kept your body church-ready, your dignity intact, and your hope flickering outsmarting Watt's schemes and the village's gossip, despite the steward's taxes and the reek of tanneries. You thought your deodorant stick nowadays, with its crisp alpine scent and roll-on ease, was a hygiene hero. Think again, because you're now tucking a sachet of lavender and thyme into your tunic, a medieval air freshener per 1382. Household accounts to fight the village's stench. Human waste-tanning urine and smoke that could choke a dragon per urban records. You're dabbing vinegar rosemary mix on your wrists per 1367. Merchant guides, dodging Watt's premium pomander that smells like ditchweeds. The village enforces smell laws per 1371. London statutes, and you're tempted to let the stink win. But a sweet scent's your shield, and you're not letting Watt's fumes or the priest's nose ruin you. This isn't just hygiene. It's a medieval perfume war, and you're battling odor with herbs, vinegar, and a grimace. You're in your one-room hut, a drafty wattle and daub shack where the fire pit's embers sputter, and the air's thick with smoke and pottage fumes. Your kids giggling as you sew a sachet, a scrap of linen stuffed with lavender you scavenge from a meadow per communal hygiene practices. Nowadays, you'd spritz a perfume or swipe on antiperspirant to mask sweat. But in 1295, your deodorant is this sachet pinned inside your tunic to fend off the village's miasma bad air. Blamed for plague, per medical beliefs, and you're tucking it close, hoping it lasts past Sunday's church, where the priest's nose is keener than his scripture per social accounts. You're tempted to skip it. The lavender's scarce, and sowing's a chore after plowing. But a foul whiff draws glares worse than a missed tithe, and you're dodging the smell warden, a village sniffer who finds the rank per 1371 town laws. You're dabbing vinegar mixed with rosemary on your wrists. Its sharp tang, a medieval Febreze per merchant recipes, and you're dodging. Watts Pomander, a rag ball. He claims holds sage, but smells like his cart, per tavern, gossip. You're praying the sachet holds, because a stench now means a fine or a sermon, and you're not risking either. The sachet's no trifle. It's a lifeline, stuffed with Time's antibacterial oils, per archaeological finds, unlike the noble's pomanders. Metal orbs, brimming with cloves that cost more than your hut per court records. Nowadays, you'd have body sprays and scented lotions, but here your perfume is this linen scrap, and your lotion is a vinegar dab that stings like a wasp per hygiene logs. You're tempted to let the village's stink waste smoke and Tanner's vats win. But the smell warden's patrol is stricter than the steward's tax rounds, and you're picturing the 1371 London case, where a tanner was fined for fouling the square, forced to supply public pomanders per statutes. You're dodging Watts' deal on a sachet he found likely swiped from Agnes's wash per 1389 court disputes, and you're tempted to dunk him in the river. But his gossip's sharper than his stench, and you're not sparking a feud. You're sewing your fingers pricked, and you're proud. Because this sachet's your armor against a village that sniffs out shame, even if it's a fragile herb-stuffed shield. The village is a hive of smell talk, because every soul's fighting the same reek from the blacksmith's soot sweat to the tanner's urine funk, and a good sachet's worth more than a day's wage per trade accounts. You overhear the blacksmith's wife boasting about her secret clove mix, claiming it outshines the priest's incense, and a kid whining about a sachet that spilled per gossip logs. Nowadays, you'd have air purifiers and colognes. But in 1295, your purifier is this sachet, and your cologne is vinegar's bite per hygiene practices. You're tempted to trade for Agnes's sage. She swears it lasts longer, but your barley's for bread. And you're not swapping food for frills. You're dodging Watts' pomander, which he claims is noble grade, but smells like a privy. And you're tempted to shove it in his cart, but his tales could turn the village against you. And you're not risking ostracism. You're dabbing your wrists, tingling, and you're proud, because this scents your rebellion, even if it's a faint, fleeting fight against a village that smells like despair. You're not reckless, though you know, scent's a gamble. One bad herb, and you're reeking worse. One torn sachet, and you're fined like the 1295 villager who lost a week's wage for offending the square, per health records. You're also aware of the stakes. If you stink, the priest's sermon on unclean souls hits harder, and trade shuns the foul per social accounts. The tavern warns of sachets that molded or vinegar that burned, and you're double-checking your time like a medieval perfumer because you're not letting Watts' ditchweeds betray you. You're tempted to skip the herbs, but you settle for careful stitches because haste is a scent's worst enemy, and you've got kids to feed and fields to plow. You're not blind to the risks, rotten herbs, Watts scams, and a warden who'd fine you for a whiff, but you're ready because this hut's your perfumery and you're forging freshness from vinegar and grit. You're not alone, though. The village is a network of scent fighters, mothers, drovers, even Watt, all battling the same stink, sharing lavender sprigs or warnings about bad vinegar, like the 1289 Hamlet that pooled sage to fend off a smell fine per records. You trade a nod with Agnes for her trick of tying sachets tighter, because 1295's about teamwork, and a shared hack's a fresher village. You're tempted to dream of the Lord's pomanders, maybe with cloves and no sting. But you shake it off because your sachet's your reality, and it's worth more than a noble's orb if it keeps you respectable. You're tempted to curse the reek medieval records, say 40% of villagers faced smell fines, but you keep it cool because wasting energy's a sin. And you're not tempting fate. You're tucking wrists, burning spirit steady, and you're savoring every herb-soaked stink-fighting second. Because this isn't just hygiene, it's a medieval epic. And you're the peasant, scarred but stubborn, masking your stink with a pomander that guards your pride. The linen that saves your skin. You're still slogging through the muddy, smoky chaos of 1295 England. Marjorie, a weathered peasant who's braved the village's murky river spa to scrub off field grime, scoured your skin with oak ash, paste, battled lice with a bone comb, chewed a cherry twig to save your smile-stuffed mint into your shoes, to freshen your feet, and tucked lavender sachets into your tunic to mask the village's stench of waste and tanneries. You've kept your body church-ready, your pride intact, and your hope flickering outsmarting Watt's foul schemes and the village's gossip, despite the steward's taxes and the priest's nose. You thought your breathable workout gear nowadays, with its weekly wash and moisture-wicking tech, was a hygiene game-changer. Think again, because you're now boiling linen undergarments. Your sweat-soaking armor, per 1375 household accounts, in a pot with ash and mint to keep your outer wool tunic clean. Sewing herb patches under the armpits, per 1391 tailor guides. You're scrubbing in your smoky hut, your wool tunic itching like a flea market reject, dodging Watt's help that smells worse than the river. The village enforces linen inspections per 1382 court records, and you're tempted to let the dirt win. But clean linen's your shield, and you're not letting Watt's stench or the priest's glare ruin you. This isn't just laundry. It's a medieval lifeline, and you're saving your skin with lather labor and a stubborn streak. You're in your one-room hut, a drafty wattle and daub shack where the fire pit's embers glow and the air's thick with smoke and pottage fumes. Your kids hovering as you stir a pot of steaming water. Your 2 linen shifts simmering like a grim stew per laundry records. Nowadays, you'd toss your gym clothes in a washing machine with scented detergent and call it a day. But in 1295, your washer is this pot, and your detergent is oak ash potassium, carbonate's gritty magic, per medieval manuals mixed with mint. To kill the funk of field sweat, per hygiene accounts, you're tempted to skip the wash boiling's a chore after plowing, and your hands are raw, but filthy linen breeds fleas and draws the priest's scorn at church, where a clean shift signals virtue per social customs. You're scrubbing with a wooden paddle, your arms aching like you've hauled a week's barley, dodging Watt's premium ash, likely scooped from a privy per tavern, gossip, because his last deal left Agnes's shift gray, per village complaints. You're praying the linen holds, because a tear now means sewing by firelight, and you're not risking a frayed shift before Sunday. Linen's your unsung hero, a breathable antibacterial layer that wicks sweat and spares your wool tunic per 1362 tailor guides, unlike the noble's perfumed shifts soaked in rosewater per 1388 inventories. Nowadays, you'd have cotton tees and quick-dry fabrics. But here, your athleisure is this lawn washed weekly, while your outer clothes go months per household accounts. You're tempted to wear it dirty. The village's stink masks worse, but the linen inspector, a village busybody, checks for quality and cleanliness, finding the foul per 1382 court records. And you're dodging her, like you dodge Watt's cart, which could clear a market square. You're sewing a time patch under the armpit, a medieval deodorant that traps sweat per Taylor Innovations, and you're picturing the 1382 case where a merchant was shamed for selling false linen mixed with hemp, forced to wear his own itchy shirt per court logs. You're tempted to barter for Agnes's sage. She swears it lasts longer, but your barley's for bread, and you're not trading food for frills. You're stirring your knuckles, stinging, and you're proud because this linen's your skin's savior, even if it's a gritty, steaming slog. The village is a hive of laundry talk, because every soul's fighting the same grime, from the blacksmith's soot-stained shifts to the tanner's urine-soaked rags, and a clean lawn's worth more than a day's wage per trade logs. You overhear the blacksmith's wife boasting about her secret mint wash, claiming it outshines the priest's vestments, and a kid whining about a shift that shrank per gossip accounts. Nowadays, you'd have laundromats and fabric softeners, but in 1295, your laundry is this pot, and your softener is a rinse in river water per hygiene practices. You're tempted to trade for Agnes's rosemary. She swears it kills fleas faster, but you're dodging Watt's help, offering to stir your pot for a cut of your barley. His hand's dirtier than the ash per village complaints. You're tempted to boast about your time patches, a rare sewing feat. But you keep it low-key, because flaunting your linen in 1295 is a great way to draw Watt's borrowing or Agnes's envy. You're scrubbing your arms, throbbing, and you're proud because this lawn's your lifeline, even if it's a steaming, stinging fight. You're not reckless, though you know laundry's a gamble. One bad ash, and your shift's gray. One wrong boil, and it's shrunk, like the 1295 villager who lost a week's trade for a foul shift per health records. You're also aware of the stakes. If your linen's dirty, the priest's sermon on unclean souls hits harder, and trade shuns the flea-ridden per social accounts. The tavern warns of washes that burned skin, or linens that tore, and you're double-checking your ash, like a medieval chemist, because you're not letting Watt's ditch dirt betray you. You're tempted to rush, but you settle for slow stirs, because haste is a shift's worst enemy, and you've got kids to feed and fields to plow. You're not blind to the risks scalding water, Watt's scams, and an inspector who'd fine you for a stain. But you're ready, because this hut's your laundromat, and you're forging cleanliness from ash and grit. You're not alone, though. The village is a network of linen scrubbers, mothers weavers, even Watt, all battling the same fleas, sharing mint sprigs, or warnings about bad ash, like the 1289 Hamlet that pooled sage to fend off a flea plague per records. You trade a nod with Agnes for her trick of rinsing twice, because 1295's about teamwork and a shared hacks, a cleaner village. You're tempted to dream of the Lord's rose-scented shifts, maybe with no gritty ash, but you shake it off, because your lawn's your reality, and it's worth more than a noble silk if it keeps you respectable. You're tempted to curse the burned medieval records, say 40% of washers got rashes from bad ash, but you keep it cool, because wasting energy's a sin, and you're not tempting fate. You're boiling hands, stinging spirit steady, and you're savoring every lather-soaked skin-saving second, because this isn't just laundry, it's a medieval epic, and you're the peasant, scarred but stubborn, guarding your skin with lawn, That's your lifeline.